Hi there. I'm Ian Nunes, Regional Sales Director for CleFi in the UK, and I'd like to welcome you to CleFi's first webinar run by our new UK team. Today we're touching on an all-important issue, not only for the UK, but one that resonates globally. That's scams. For those of you that don't know much about CleFi, we combine cybersecurity with fraud management into one platform. This means that regardless of the attack type, you're protected. Unlike traditional reactive fraud detection systems, we provide proactive, precise and frictionless way to protect against fraud typologies such as APP scams, ATO and ATS fraud. We have a threat intelligence team as well. So they're an authority in the fraud prevention space. They were the first to identify complex malware strains. So you've probably heard of T-Bot, SharkBot and SpyNote. These were all identified and mitigated by CleFi. And then we used our platform to disseminate the ability to stop these threats to all of our customers in real time. Our tools have helped commercial and consumer banks across Europe, where we work with 5 of the top 20 banks. And CleFi has also been widely deployed in a number of countries, including our home country of Italy, where we saved 9 of the top 10 banks millions in fraud prevention, operational improvements, and enhanced customer experience. We also publish regular white papers on the latest threats. If you'd like to join a mailing list on this, you can catch that at clefi.com/labs. So today if we can move on to the agenda, we're going to kick off and talk a bit about a number of different scam-related topics. But to put it into context, let's think about some stats we've seen. In the PSR's APP report of 2023, we heard that there are more incidents of fraud than any other crime type in the UK. So it's imperative that banks are adequately protected. The rise of technology, particularly AI, has changed the face of fraud, and fraudsters are now employing sophisticated and personalized social engineering tactics to challenge traditional detection efforts. UK Finance said in this year's annual fraud report that APP fraud accounted for 39% of all fraud losses in 2023. So we're going to drill into this and address a few questions that don't really get asked very often. So where does the scam actually start? Is it really with someone being socially engineered? What are all the steps of the scam? What's going on behind the scenes that we don't usually see? And lastly, where does the money go? Does it just go into a crypto wallet for criminals to use? We'll try and answer these questions today, as well as to discuss what can be done about scams. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Mick. Should we start with setting the scene? What can we say about the current scam types?
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you today. I think maybe just before I sort of get into some of the context, it's important to just to take note that we talk about these statistics that you've just shared, but behind the things we're going to talk about today, there's real people involved. So bad actors, taking advantage of and harming, real innocent individuals, and so. When we look at these things, there's always some good news and bad news. I'm going to talk probably what sounds a bit more like bad news to begin with, before handing over to Nico, who I think will share more of the good news. But just to kick us off, actually, we're just going to do a quick poll, and so the poll should hopefully be coming up on people's screens. I really appreciate the participation just to get us started. And the question is just a yes or no, simple, whether you have been scammed, attempted to be scammed, or know someone who has been. If you could just take 30 seconds to give us a view of that. We expect the numbers to be fairly high. Okay, great. So so as expected, it's over 90%. So over 90% of you who are attending this webinar this morning either have been scammed or attempted to be, or know someone directly who has. This is so prevalent now that's the scenario that we're in. Unfortunately, these are rarely sort of random one-off attacks. So more often they are coordinated, targeted campaigns, and according to a Europol report in 2023, becoming much more professionalized. The objective of the attackers is to steal money or to steal information that leads to stealing money in the fastest and cheapest way possible. AMS, or more specifically, we'll talk a little bit about today about authorized push payments, sort of one of the current ways that these objectives are being met. Preying on sort of arguably the most vulnerable link in the chain, which is us, both our natural human tendencies and emotions, as well as sort of the devices that we use every day, i.e., our mobile phones, that sit outside of the bank's perimeter of defense. So that said, scams can range from relatively basic, almost single shot approaches through to extremely sophisticated and persistent ones, often with the attacker or the threat actor responding to actions taken by individuals and organizations and progressing through sort of complex, multi-dimensional set of steps and actions. And so today I'm going to talk through a couple of those scenarios before handing over to Nico, like I said, who will share with you a case study and some of the different capabilities that you might consider in order to prevent the negative impact of scams on your business. So every fraudulent attack is made up of a number of steps or actions by the threat actor, commonly known as the kill chain. So when we look at APP scams with social engineering as sort of the main tactic, we most likely picture something that looks like this. And there was a report in The Guardian not too long ago that sort of described this scenario. An individual, a threat actor, made a call to the victim, impersonating a member of the fraud investigation team of a bank, suggesting to the victim that their account was being sort of unauthorized, receiving some sort of unauthorized access with money looking to be transferred. And in order to protect her money, that she needed to move what was in her account to a sort of safeguarding account held by the bank until they were able to solve the issue. And bad news, this person was manipulated out of about $7,500. And so this is sort of the common thing that we think about. A threat actor makes a voice phishing call, impersonating someone who the victim is likely to trust. A common tactic is the fraud investigator or risk agent. They create a sense of urgency. Their account has been hacked, and invite and manipulate the victim into taking some sort of action in order to resolve the problem. Oftentimes transferring money, but sometimes giving away sensitive information. The money is transferred to an account that's held by the threat actor. Maybe there's a second victim involved in this scenario that's acting as the mule for that sort of beneficiary bank account. Let's look at sort of what we know in this scenario. So about the device and the user, so the location, the behavior about how the user is in the app or the website. We might know, depending on the tools we're using, that the victim is on call at the time that the transaction is taking place. We might know information about the transaction itself, so the amount, the location, the payee, the time. And if we've had reports from customers about these sort of attacks, we might have insight into specific keywords being used in the transaction reference. So all these types of attacks are fast and cheap for threat actors. We do have some sort of data here. Individuals are becoming a bit more savvy to these type of scams, and the actions that we take as organizations to block transactions can and do help limit losses. However, these actions that we take don't simply make the threat actor go away, unfortunately, and stop trying. Oftentimes, actors invested in buying stolen credentials or other data that has allowed them to begin the campaign in the first place. It's unlikely that they're just going to abandon their efforts and this sort of valuable asset that they've acquired. And so before I move on, we're just going to do another quick poll. So you'll see that come up on the screen. And so with that in mind, what I've just talked about, the social engineering piece, the question is, what percentage of fraud attacks do you think include more than just social engineering? For example, both cyber and social engineering type elements in the attack. I'd be interested to get the audience's thoughts on that. Okay, so it's really interesting actually. We've got a bit of a spread in terms of what people think. So some people have sort of chosen quite low, 10, 15%. Some people have chosen about 35%, but majority of people have selected 60% or above. And those people who chose the higher numbers would ultimately be right. A report by CertFin and backed up by the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre has stated that over 80% of fraud attacks include a hybrid of both social and cyber elements, with social engineering being often just only one part of the puzzle. And in corporate banking, in addition, over 40% of attacks include advanced malware. So given this trend to sort of increase complexity, we might ask ourselves some different questions, similar to the ones that Ian asked in the beginning. What happens before this point of the phone call and the transaction? Has our data been subject to breach or been stolen somewhere? Were there actually cyber indicators of attack in the lead up to this particular point? What are all the steps in the process? How did the threat actor know that these individuals were customers of the bank in the first? Was and is there malware involved? And what else is going on in our application or along the customer journey? So, for example, what's happening at login, or what's happening with account details being changed, as well as what's happening at the point of transaction and even post transaction. If we only focus on the social engineering piece of these type of attacks, then we might miss a lot of really useful data. A more complex kill chain, often employed, when some of these basic tactics maybe prove less effective due to the actions that we take as individuals and organizations, actually looks more like this. So the threat actor does a whole bunch of reconnaissance, purchasing data from the dark web, or scraping data from social media, or collecting data via phishing. They may sell that data to other threat actors. They validate that data. So perhaps they've already got verified bank customer data, but they might also use other tactics like bots and credential stuffing techniques, where they take either credentials they've stolen or purchased, or parts of credentials, and they use them to try and log into a site or an app and look for signals that the customer belongs to the institution that they're targeting, and they are targeting institutions. And so yes, then they go and conduct some social engineering, but it's not just a phone call. This is a multi-channel campaign launched from very sophisticated tools that enable a threat actor to cycle through different techniques and to pivot based on what's working. So voice phishing we talked about, phishing, social media ads, a lot of pretexting, so setting the context to try and build that trust and create that sense of urgency. Doing things like using spoofed phone numbers and even generative AI deepfakes as part of the approach. So using these techniques, they might not just force a money transfer, but they then steal additional credential information, request credential updates, or other types of things that maybe allows them to steal OTPs and one-time passwords and other things. Or even deploy malware through inadvertent clicks or app downloads, even from official app stores. The threat actor is then in a really strong position to increase trust and legitimacy in manipulating the victim to transfer money, or to now have control of their credential, account takeover, or even remote access through malware. And essentially, this is sort of the example that Nico is going to talk through in our case study. And you can imagine that with this type of attack, a lot more data is created. The data footprint is a lot bigger, but that's only true if you're looking for it. Okay, so there's a lot more data, but only if you're looking for it. The challenge with sort of classic fraud managers is that effectiveness against these more complex but growing in frequency kill chains. The prevalence of and growing nature of fraud and the numbers that Ian talked about, I think, is sort of testament to that fact. If we just look at challenges briefly for a moment, actions often applied too late in the user journey. So primarily at the point of transaction, where in a world of increasingly instant payments, the fraud has come and gone before you know it, and the organization is left in an overly reactive position. The threat is often happening sort of well before that point. And this is sort of characterized by this attack timeline you see here on the screen. As you can see, the common scenario is that if we only focus at the point of transaction as the place that we learn and determine the patterns and implement a course of mitigating actions, the damage has sort of largely already been done. And by the time we take action, as mentioned, there's a pivoting, they're responding in order to evade those actions that we take, and then continue with their attack. Our objective has to be to much earlier identification, characterization, and implementation of actions, using as much data as we can possibly get our hands on in order to flatten the curve and to shift it left. Some additional challenges sort of to doing this is often that solutions take a sort of single lens approach. They siloed, sometimes from different vendors, and that's not necessarily a problem. But they try and treat every problem the same way, with the same detection capability or models, or even sort of a sort of rolled up, aggregated, score-oriented approach. This approach can lead to tightening controls to minimize risk, which is good. But as a result, it impacts customer experience by increasing false positives and also as a result, operational costs. So the things to be aware of. And lastly, the reality of this is that technology is enabling more sophisticated kill chains at a much lower cost and barrier to entry for the threat actors. Examples of fraud as a service are growing. You can see that in the sort of industry reports and literature. Where we have multi-channel marketing campaigns, they have part in multi-channel command and control centers or platforms, phishing, etc., that allow them to deploy, cross-border malware deployment or social engineering campaigns. You can see here on the screen. This is an image of one such command and control platform that our threat intelligence team reverse engineered to identify. And you can see that this looks and feels like maybe many of the enterprise apps that we would use in our own organizations. And so, again, just to talk to that point about this becoming much more professionalized. Where we have a focus on frictionless user experience, they have a focus on frictionless fraud strategies with the likes of ATS attacks via malware and even malware as a service. Where we have cool AI content, image and video generation, they're using that technology for things like targeted deep fakes. And so remember, the objective is to steal money or information stealing money in the fastest and cheapest way possible. And these reduced barriers to entry will enable sort of that increase in scaling in these more complex kill chains moving forward. So I know that does all actually sound like bad news, but what's clear is that doing the same things the way we've done for the past is no longer adequate. It's why the PSR has said that the new requirements that they're pushing through will prompt a step change in culture to improve fraud prevention and focus all firms on protecting people. And so that's sort of it from me. I'm going to hand over to Nico. So Nico, tell us how this type of culture and change in approach has helped one European digital bank. curve. Over to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mick, and welcome everyone. So I'm Nicola Pastore, co-founder and CTO of Clify. As Mick mentioned, APP or scam is just one link in a chain of attacks that fraudsters use to execute a fraudulent transaction. And the good news is with our experience, we have identified 6 key elements necessary for effectively managing these scenarios. We have integrated this element into our platform. So the first point is end-to-end visibility. It is crucial to observe the entire user navigation flow across multiple channels, such as web, mobile, and open banking. This comprehensive view allows us to track both user and, of course, fraudster movements across all potential attack points. The second point is multidimensional analysis. So this involves combining various aspects and anomalies to understand the current situation better. Specifically, performing behavior analysis, malware detection, and transaction analysis with the same analytical context is essential. By integrating these different analyses, we can better understand the attack pattern used by the fraudster. And the third point is event correlation. We need to correlate different types of events continuously and across entities. This enhances the value of our multidimensional analysis by connecting more pieces of information and improving our understanding of the user and the fraudster activities. The fourth point is real-time processing. In a world characterized by instant payment and real-time money transfer, our analysis and correlation must be performed in real time. This immediacy is essential to effectively counteract fraud. The fifth point is having an effective and exhaustive built-in threat intelligence system. This system should be tailored to offer specific information relevant to our online banking service. Continuous enrichment of threat intelligence within our analytical context help us stay ahead of potential known and unknown threats. And finally, the sixth point is an automatic and dynamic response system. This system allows us to respond promptly to potential attacks, mitigating the risk and thwarting the fraudster efforts. By leveraging visibility, multidimensional analysis, real-time event correlation, and enriched intelligence information, we can respond effectively to any attack. To illustrate this, let's dive in a real scenario where a fraudster employed various techniques from bot attack, APP application push payment scams, spoofing, account takeover, phishing, Android malware, and device takeover. So, in the initial phase, the attacker generated a significant bot attack originating from a network of over 100,000 IP addresses. This bot attack exploits an application vulnerability to verify combinations of email addresses and phone numbers collected from the dark network and data breaches, determining if the user were part of the targeted bank's customer base. Unfortunately, traditional bot detection and web application firewall systems fail to identify this aggressive bot attack. However, with the visibility provided Clify, the client identified this anomalous traffic and pinpointed the asset involved, including the IP addresses of the bot network and the users verified by the fraudster. Through quick analytics, the client discovered that over 2 million credentials had been verified via the bot attack network, with 1,500 users identified as part of the bank's customer base and at risk of the potential attack. Following this bot attack phase, the fraudster escalated their effort using an impersonation scam techniques. By mimicking a bank operator with the spoofed bank phone number, the fraudster convinced users to perform transactions committing fraud. Fortunately, the client leveraging the Clify platform could prevent and block these impersonation scam attempts. They used data gathered during the bot attack phase, including information on at-risk users and normal behavior identified the platform. This multidimensional analysis combining device usage and on-call information revealed the precise attack scenario. Despite the initial blocks, the fraudster switched tactics using another impersonation scam to request user credentials. This allowed them to enroll the application on the fraudster device, creating an account takeover scenario. With the victim's account enrolled on their device, the fraudster could execute transactions. However, through the platform comprehensive visibility, the client identified his account takeover scenario using multiple behavior analysis and information from the previous stages, preventing fraud attempts totaling up to 150,000 euros in a couple of days. Blocked at each step, the fraudster resorts to a new technique, sending SMS messages as part of a phishing campaign to infect the user device with copybar Android malware. This Android malware enables complete device takeover, allowing the fraudster to conduct transactions on the user's legitimate device. Even in this case, the client utilizing robust malware detection system, the platform, and the built-in targeted threat intelligence enrichment created by our CleFi Lab team identified the device infection early and blocked transaction from the infected device, initiating remediation action to clean up, for example, the victim's device. In essence, the fraudster attempts included using a botnet to gather customer information, employing impersonation scam to conduct fraudulent transactions, enrolling new device to execute account takeover, and finally using malware for remote access and device takeover. Each phase was thwarted by multidimensional and real-time analysis alongside dynamic response, forcing the fraudster to abandon the attack campaign and seek a less vigilant target. Through that analysis, we observed that the client managed to mitigate almost 8 million euros in potential losses during a fraud campaign that lasted a couple of months, demonstrating the importance of the comprehensive visibility and an effective response to attack pattern. So now I'll hand it over to my colleague Jan for concluding remarks. Jan?
Thanks a lot, Nico, for taking us through this, frankly, scary scam typology. So what we can see here is that the fraudsters are using a complex attack chain and then pivoting based on the actions of the bank. So let's come back to the questions we asked at the start of the presentation. Where does the scam actually start? It's clear to see in this case, it's not just someone picking up the phone to socially engineer a random person. This is a crafted attack with multiple facets. What are all the steps of the scam? What's going on behind the scenes? The scam was initially involved a bot and a bot attack testing credentials, then an impersonation scam involving a call. When this failed, it was SMS and call spoofing as part of an ATO campaign, which again was blocked. And lastly, the fraudsters reverted to malware and copybarra. So this was a multi-threaded process that blurred the lines of traditional fraud typologies. Let me ask you a question. Are you set up to deal with this? And then the final question we asked earlier was, where does the money go? Does it just go into crypto wallets for criminals to use? Well, I can't actually answer that question, but what I can say, if it was just one man and his dog carrying out this type of fraud, do you think they would have had both the tenacity and the capability to leverage all of those different attack vectors described in this presentation? It has to be more organized than that. Given the diverse nature and the number of the different threats that we're seeing, the chances are that this was a professional operation where a number of advanced resources were put to use in order to target this bank specifically. Perhaps it was an organized crime group, maybe even a nation state, but whoever it was, I think the message is, be warned, these criminals mean business. But that's not the only concern. We know that fraud is becoming more accessible to more people because it's an easier crime for many potential fraudsters to commit. I think I was at a conference last week and they were talking about the sentences for fraud why would criminals carry out armed robbery if you can do it without a gun, if you can steal things online? So as Mick spoke about the increase in malware as a service, it means that anybody with tenacity and a little bit of technical knowledge is capable of launching a malware attack to steal credentials or to carry out fraud. And malware is becoming more sophisticated too. Malware can be used to authenticate transactions. It's scary what malware is capable of. So lastly, I think I'd like to ask you, I'd like to ask you to ask yourselves, do you have the visibility that you need? Are you looking across all vectors to spot fraud? Can you join up the cyber and fraud data so that you're empowered to make proactive decisions? So that's all we've lined up to present today, but I invite any questions you may have. Feel free to ask them through the platform. I think that there've been one or two coming through as we've been speaking, so we'll just get started with those now. So question to the panel then, do you think that some fraud or scams are being misclassified by banks and it was actually some kind of automated threat all along? Who would like to take that one?
So I can take this question. So Jan.
Please do.
I get? Yeah. So in our experience, we have a current situation where customers, through they were facing overwhelming number of fraud, scam, and account takeover incidents. So, however, upon closer examination, we found that it was actually malware that was causing this issue and their device. And in our experience, this misclassification often occurs due to limited visibility or the use of products that rely on black box information or score without clear explanations. So,
sure, makes sense. I think this has to be the case, right? I think that I think with the rise of malware as a service, I think and the fact that malware can do things that we've never traditionally seen done before, and unfortunately, the fact that fraudsters are creative and sophisticated in their attack methodologies, I think that they're always going to be trying to find ways to break down defenses and use automated threats to attack banks these days. So I think that must be the case, and I think that some of our conversations have played that out as well.
Yeah.
So there's another question. So aside from the obvious things like deepfakes, can you give examples of how AI is going to change the multifaceted nature of fraud and scams? I have a couple of ideas around this. So I guess with the recent advancements in AI, because you've got predictive and generative technologies, they're bringing, I mean, it's certain that the world of fraud is changing as a result. And on one hand, you've got fraudsters and the bad guys who've got access to additional tools. They can create new malware without requiring specific skills. And you saw in Mick's slide the malware as a service. It was really sophisticated. The tool that the fraudsters were actually using to commit fraud, I mean, arguably it was better than some of the tools I've used in my 20 years to protect banks against fraud. So, I mean, these are creative guys. But on the other hand, defenders have improved capabilities to identify fraud and scams. So hopefully we can leverage AI to help the good fight back against the bad guys. So in the field of predictive AI, for example, we've recently released some technology that allows real-time classification models for identifying Android malware with a really high degree of accuracy. which has enabled us to carry out identification of things like T-bot, Sharkbot, Pixparrot, etc. And in generative AI, for example, we've also introduced an AI assistant that allows agents, allows us to kind of co-pilot in data analysis and fraud detection. So reducing analysis to just a few seconds. So I think the key is making sure that we're making as much use of AI as the fraudsters are in the fight against fraud. The last question that I can see here, so again, feel free to jump in if you've got any further questions. How can you be confident in the stat that 81% of fraud involves some indicator of cyber attack if not all banks have the ability to detect fraud and or cyber incidents? Nico, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I can pick this one up. I think actually the answer is pretty similar to the one that Nico gave on the first question. So there's threat intelligence teams like our own, but they exist, inside financial institutions, other independent bodies, and so oftentimes it's actually we find out this information through retroanalysis. So we're investigating incidents that have taken place, and as we trace the tactics, techniques, and procedures that have been used, we uncover these facts. So while an institution may not be as maybe well armed as it could be at the time of an incident, in sort of a retro analysis phase, we discover these facts. So that's sort of where that 81% comes from. I think the majority of attacks, as we talked about, include this hybrid element, and there's a number of reports that's been published in. So we need to get better at the sort of end-to-end visibility and understanding, what is happening in the lead up to these attacks, and not just maybe assuming that it's very one-dimensional, because I think, as Nico's explained, it's rarely the case.
Sure, thanks. We've had a question from the audience, which another one which I would like to try and answer. So, given all the scam scenarios presented here, is there any kind of silent mobile verification that can be used as a step to verify if a transaction is potentially fraudulent? Interpreting that question, I think it's all part of the risk analysis journey. So I imagine the person asking the question is thinking, is there any way you can kind of do a real-time check on the mobile to verify in real time if that transaction is fraudulent or not? And that's certainly something we'd try and encourage as part of the analysis that we do with every transaction, to look at the context, to look at all the different associated potential threat indicators to make a call whether something is risky or not. Nico, Mick, do you have anything to add to that one?
So I think that the important to block some suspicious behavior before the transaction is crucial. So basically, if you have a great visibility what is going on before the transaction, it's important to use in order to try to mitigate the risk. Of course, you can use the information during the transaction phase, yes, but if you have a great visibility and deterministic element to see that something is going wrong, for example, is a scam attempts or another kind of attacks, for example, malware and other pieces like this. So basically, it's crucial to use before the transaction in order to mitigate the risk before that possible fraud transaction.
Makes sense. Thank you. Well, I think that's it for question. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much on behalf of the CleFi team. Appreciate you joining the webinar. There'll be more to come. If anything else crops up, any other thoughts or queries or questions, feel free to reach out to the email address on the screen now. And thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.